Okay, so the point of doing the crow is to address those feathers and some of the other textures there. There's texture in the beak and in the eye. We're going to start by outlining it, and you can outline this on your own lightly, and then you're going to go in and you're going to start to fill in the shading. Now, it is important that you outline some of the feathers too. You can see mine is pretty detailed, and I outlined some of the shadow shapes. Remember, it is ideal to go from dark into the midtones and finally into the lights. That's the best practice. And the reason for that is because you don't want to create a murky gray with the black and the white pencil blending or the graphite plus white blending. You want them to be separate. That like murky gray equals flat, and we're always trying to create volume. So we're trying to create that illusion that this could be a living, breathing, three-dimensional thing. I do recommend that you kind of wrap your stroke around the form, especially on the feathers that kind of curve around. I'm looking for any basic shadow shape, and I'm trying to work my way from the darkest values to the midtones. So there is definitely a process to doing a drawing like this, and you want to work it up slowly. Take your time, make sure your proportions are correct and everything is placed with about like 95% accuracy before you shade. And then even your shading needs to be accurate. That means like neat shading. You shouldn't have any weird gaps or blotchiness unless it's purposeful in the shading. So that's what you're aiming for. Please don't skip ahead and start adding white. Please don't go on to the next texture. I'm going to walk you through it, and the reason for that is I want to make sure that you can nail all of these before you get to your own project and you're kind of left to work independently. When it comes to the project, I am going to be grading you based on your recreation of texture. And remember, your texture is implied, whether that's rough, smooth, shiny, bumpy, like there's a whole bunch of textures out there. The more textures you actually have within a work of art, the more interest you'll create for your viewer. So I am looking for mastery of texture. For this drawing, I don't want you to use a ton of blending stump. In fact, I think I only used it in a couple of places. I did put it a little bit in the eye to get that eye to be a little shiny. But the thing about the blending stump is once you blend, it doesn't mean that you're done. You actually probably should go back in with a graphite pencil and layer on top of your blend. Then it will actually like sink a little bit better and it will kind of gradiate from one texture to the next. Be on the lookout for any kind of patterns, and that includes like light patterns, but there's also patterns within the feathers, like little marks and dots, and you want to try and recreate that. If you look at the really good graphite artists, the ones that work in pencil, those guys are so good at identifying and recreating texture in animals and basically any subject. So I want you to have that skill too. Okay, so here I'm starting to put in more of the midtones. You can see the darks are already in place, and then I'm just going to start to lightly add the midtones. And I am using charcoal and graphite combined in this just to get it to go a little bit darker. You are welcome to just stick to graphite. You don't have to use the charcoal unless you really want to get some of those intense blacks. I want to pause and show you the kneaded eraser for a sec because you should know how to handle it. You actually do want to like hold it and squeeze it. The warmer that eraser is, the more malleable, more flexible it's going to be. So I usually like to kind of have like a rounded end that I can put in the palm of my hand and then a point. So you use that little point to get detailed areas, basically subtracting material off the paper. If that point becomes like too dirty with graphite, you squish it again and then you'll have another clean area if you make a new point on that eraser. And ideally you do want to stamp down and lift off material, so you can see me kind of dotting it down. That's a really good way to use it. You can rub it, but the dotting method is actually preferred, especially if you're trying to get a really small area like in a highlight. Last comes the light. For each feather, by the way, there is a little miniature gradient. So each little feather has a gradient. Now, I'm not picking out every single feather on that chest. I'm going to show you that in a minute. But I am getting some of it, and then I'm simplifying the other feathers. You want to give at least the gist of feather texture before you have it kind of fade into the side. One thing also about edges, because we talked about edges the other day, is you want to let a lot of your edges be soft edges, way more than you probably think. Like here in the head, you'd let the beak kind of be a sharp edge, but then the back of the head and the neck, you'd want to blur a little bit. And not necessarily with a blending stump. I would actually prefer you to try blurring with the graphite and by doing a light gradient to get it to just shift and go hazy. Here's what it looks like towards the end. See if you can get the kind of like the neck feathers to be kind of iridescent, like shiny. Um, Mine turned out like okay, but I have a feeling that there's going to be a number of you guys who can outdo me on this drawing. So that is your challenge. Try and do a better crow with rich texture in the feathers and in the eye.